I'm going to show you a very interesting, instructive game which was played by Magnus Carlsen last weekend in the Norwegian Team Championship. He played a game against a Grandmaster from Bulgaria, 18 years old, with the name Petkov, rated 24.99, so there's a rating difference of more than 300 points. Magnus, of course, is the big favorite, but these games with a huge rating gap, they're very helpful for us to understand better the ins and outs of certain type of positions. In this game, you will learn a lot about the Sicilian opening, how to exploit weak squares, make plans, and also we get a very fine endgame masterclass to see. So let's have a look together. Make sure to subscribe to this channel if you would like to learn more about such topics. So Magnus, playing with the white pieces, goes for the move e4, black plays c5. This is the Sicilian. And as we know, Magnus is usually not interested in a huge theoretical clash. So he goes for a strange move, h3. It's not a bad move, it has been played before, but it's basically with the idea just to get the game a playable position without too much theory. So he wants to show that who is the boss in this game. Black goes d6, and now anyway we get the move d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4, and we have the open Sicilian. Black plays the move e5, and this is exactly the sort of structure I would like to talk about. White goes back with a knight to f3, and as we will see in the next stage of the game, play evolves around the d5 square. It's a weak square, and white would like to try to use it by one of its pieces, preferably a knight. So let's see what's going to happen. Black plays bishop e7, and white develops the bishop to c4. It's a nice square for the bishop. It's actively placed on this diagonal and also controls the d5 square. Black plays bishop e6, and this is already an interesting moment. There's this possibility to swap the bishops, but after f takes e6, it will be much harder for white to make use of the d5 square because the pawn on e6 is very useful. Therefore, white usually doesn't want to capture that bishop as it helps black to improve the pawn formation. The bishop therefore goes back to b3, and you're ready for the exchange of bishops, so that after recapturing, that bishop no longer controls the d5 square. Black castled, white goes bishop g5. Very thematical move with the idea to trade off the bishop for the knight, removing a defender from the d5 square so that you can nicely install your own piece on that spot in the center. What black should do now, in my opinion, is also very thematical. It was not played in the game, but you want to keep that knight on the board. So you play the move knight e7, and you're ready to go for the exchange of dark squared bishops. After bishop takes e7, queen takes e7, black trades off its worst piece, and very soon the knight will come back to the f6 square to combat the d5 square. Anyway, this didn't happen. Black played the move queen d7. In my opinion, this is imprecise. White castled kingside, black goes h6. I think this is also not really needed, as white wants to go for this exchange of bishop for the knight anyway. And then he lands on the d5 square with that piece, and that's just very great news. The knight is fantastically placed. If you would take on d5 with a bishop, white is ready to take back with its own bishop, retaining a nice grip on the light squares. Black doesn't want to allow white from capturing on f6. That would ruin the pawn structure in front of the king. So the bishop goes back, and white brings the queen to d3. White has completed its development. Rooks are nicely connected, and white is having a very pleasant edge here. What should black do? I think a move like knight a5 with the idea to trade off the bishop on b3 to remove a defender from the d5 square. Maybe the queen can come to c6, the rook can come to the c file. I prefer white's position, but anything is still possible. Instead, Petkov decides to play very actively with the move king h8. The idea is that now that after rook ad1, black is able to play the move f5, so that with the king on h8 there are never any sort of unpleasant tactical opportunities for white on this long diagonal. But now Magnus comes up with a very important idea. Black's plan is to take on e4, and if you take back with the queen, the bishop will come to f5, and black will try to become active. But with the move knight c3, white stays in control. He's about to go for the exchange of bishops now. Black no longer has a pawn on f7 to recapture with a pawn on e6, so white forces the exchange of light squared bishops. That's an excellent idea. If you would take on e4, you just take on e4 back with the knight, and there's huge pressure against the pawn on d6. This pawn is going to drop. So instead, black went back with the bishop to e7 to protect the pawn. But now white has a nice positional transformation. Trades off the bishops, and now once the bishops are off the board, the knight comes back to d5. White's advantage has increased over the last couple of moves just by trading off the light squared bishops, and in the meantime is even threatening a knight fork on c7 against the queen and rook. Bishop goes back to d8. It's a passive square, but you cover the knight fork. White plays rook fd1, black goes rook c8, and now white captures on f5. Rook takes f5, plays the move c3. That's a very useful move to take away any sort of counterplay along the c file. The pawn on c3 is wonderfully placed, controlling also squares so that the knight, the black knight, cannot jump anywhere. Black goes rook f7, and here is the next interesting moment of the game. I think white has a huge advantage thanks to that wonderful knight, a better structure, and also I would like to get another piece to e4. Magnus played the move rook e4. That looks like a stable square for the rook, but in my opinion it's better to play the move knight e2, getting the knight to e4, having two fantastic knights on these two squares. They cannot be chased away by any pawns, and you will be able to exert a lot of pressure also against the pawn on d6. Later on, there are other plans for white to activate the rooks, maybe double the rooks on the d file to maximize the pressure against the pawn on d6. Maybe a rook lift along the third rank, it's also among the possibilities, but improving the knight to e4, that's a very standard idea. It surprises me that Magnus didn't go for that plan, and instead he played the move rook to e4. Black goes knight e7 to challenge that d5 square, and of course it's possible to take on e7, bishop takes. White is still better, but the difference is that this knight on f3, it wished it could have been either on d5 or on e4. White is better, but not as much as it could have been. White kept the knights on the board to attack the pawn on d6. Bishop c7 was played, protecting the pawn, and now the queen comes to c4. White offers the exchange of queens. That's of course possible. Black can take himself in the game. There followed rook f6, queen takes e6, rook takes e6, and now the rook swings over to the b file to attack the pawn on b7. Black moves the bishop away to b6 and is ready to trade off the bishop for the knight. Trading off that bad bishop is a key theme in a lot of Sicilian structures when the pawns are on d6 and e5, fixed on the dark squares. White goes knight c4, attacking the bishop on b6, and black protects the bishop with the rook. Knight takes b6, rook takes b6, rook takes b6, a takes b6. Now we have a different endgame. Why did white exchange that knight for the bishop? Well, white is saying your pawn structure is more vulnerable. There are weak pawns on the b file. The pawn on d6 is a backward pawn. And with the move c4, I'm fixing both the pawns on b6 and d6. The next part of the plan is, okay, black activates its king, brings it to the center. White is going to improve that knight from f3. It goes to d2, and after knight c6, the knight comes into e4, attacking the pawn on d6 together with the rook. But the knight is in time to block the d file with knight d4. Of course, Magnus had seen all of this and now came up with the plan of activating the rook along the third rank. So the rook is on its way to infiltrate into black's position. Rook e7. Wait a second, what's happening now? Black is blundering the pawn on d6. Well, if you do take on d6, there is rook d7. Your knight is under threat. If the knight goes away, there is knight e4. That's a very nice little tactic. It's a discover check. If the king goes away, black captures the rook. So that means that the pawn on d6 cannot be taken. Rook a3 was played. Black goes for the move rook d7 to protect the pawn, and white goes knight c3. The knight no longer has the possibility to win the pawn on d6, so it rather tries to control both the d5 and the b5 square so that black is not able to trade off its pawn weaknesses on the B or D file. King f7, black brings the king. And now Magnus played the move rook a4. I really don't like this move at all. I don't think the rook is well placed here. It would have been much better, more actively placed on the 8th rank so that it could sometimes target the pawns from behind on the B file if the rook moves on the D file, or if the king moves, the pawn can be attacked on the G file as well. Rook a4, why is this not a good move? Black goes rook c7, king f1. White is not really able to bring its king efficiently to the center, and black is very active with a king. King e1 played by white, and here this is the big moment where black could have sacrificed the pawn with the move b5. This is maybe a difficult move to find, but very typical for a lot of endgames. After b5, you're getting rid of your doubled pawns. If you take the pawn, the rook will come to c5, attacking the pawn on b5. And next, there are ideas to play d5, mobilizing these central pawns. And that can effectively become a very important factor to reckon with. Black is trying to march its pawns, and these pawns are no longer weak at all. Black would have been back in the game, but there followed rook c5, probably with the same idea. But there is rook a7, rook takes c4, rook takes b7. White's rook is very active, attacking both the pawns on g7 and b6. Black played the move b5, very active move, intending to go b4, kick the knight away and try to enter with the rook. But white can capture that pawn on b5. This is very important. Black played here the move rook c2, but wait a second. The best move here is just to exchange the knights. And after that, white is a pawn up, but black enters with the rook, with check, king goes to d2. You try to stop the pawns. White has connected passed pawns on the queen side. They look very dangerous, but they are not far advanced yet. And black is active with a rook, preventing the white pawns from coming forward. The king is active as well. And with the move d5, it doesn't really feel as if you're a pawn down as black. You're able to bring up the pawns, and I think anything can still happen in this rook endgame. In rook endgames, remember, it's all about the activity of your pieces. Black instead played the move rook c2, attacking the pawns on the 2nd rank, cutting off the white king, so the king cannot participate. But after knight takes d4, e takes d4, you do have a passed pawn, but it will be much harder to push your pawns efficiently, because look, white plays the move a4. White is just about to run with the pawn up the board, and that pawn needs to be stopped. So after black played king d5, a5, the black rook has to come back into defense. So black wasted some time with that rook. King d2, rook a1, and now the pawn on g7 can be captured. Rook takes a5, and this is another big moment in a rook endgame, because white is a pawn up. These pawns by black, they look weak, but you should look carefully. This pawn on d4 can potentially be quite strong. The key move here for white is just to attack another pawn with the move rook g6. You cannot save the pawn with h5. It runs into rook g5 as the pawn no longer guards the g5 square. White wins the rook after the king goes away. You may play another move like rook b5, and after king c2, rook c5, king d3, you can eventually win the rook, win the pawn on b2, but white should be able to convert this with precise play. But that's a long variation, apparently not easy to find. In the game, white played the move rook f7, overprotecting the pawn on f2, but mainly with the idea to give a check on f5. So therefore, rook b5 attacking the pawn is not a good idea. It runs into this move rook f5, and white exchanges the rooks, and that will be just a winning king and pawn endgame, as the b pawn will be pushed, and eventually you pick up the other pawns and then start running with your other pawns on the other side of the board. Instead of rook b5, there followed the move rook a2. That's an excellent move. King c2, rook a1, trying to activate the rook again. White played the move f3. And here, okay, you would like to push your pawn, try to make use of your passed pawn as black, but that's far from simple. Black played here the move rook e1, but in hindsight, maybe this move, king c4, would have been better. Trying to play the move d3 and come forward with your pawn. It's a very complicated rook endgame. If you do give a check, then the king can come back and white is not able to make a lot of progress. While if you play the move b3, that's a sort of nice provocation because the king comes back to c5. So after a rook check, there's always d5, and having provoked white playing the move b3, there is counterplay on the second rank. You can give a check, attack the pawn, maybe attack the pawn on b3 at some point. This is far from simple, and probably with correct play it should be holdable. However, there followed the move rook e1. White gave a check with the rook on f5. The king comes to c4. If you're careless, there follows rook e2, and black comes really fast with its king and pawn. b3 played, check, very important insertion so that the king will be driven more to the side. Rook d5, and the rook is about to collect all these weak pawns. Rook e2 check, king d3, rook takes g2, rook takes d6. That's a nice move because you're still keeping an eye on both the weak pawns. Rook g3, you can take the pawn on d4 with check. King captures the pawn on b3, and now both the f pawn and h pawn are hanging. So it looks as if black is just in time to equalize, at least from a material point of view. But there is this move king e4. Everything is about activity. The king is playing an important role. Black's king is too far away. After rook takes h3, the f pawn is stronger than the h pawn. So white is winning here. Rook h1 was played, and white played the move f5. And this is the moment black resigned. And this may seem premature to most of you, but this f pawn is really strong. For instance, if black would just run with its own pawn, white is doing the same. Black goes h4, you go f7, you see you're about to promote the pawn. Black can stop it with its rook to cover the pawn from behind, controlling the promotion square. But there is rook d3 check, very important technique, so that after the king goes away, you interfere on the f-file, and black is no longer able to control that promotion square. This is winning. If we go back once again, after f5, h5 and f6, you can try to stop the pawn earlier with the move rook f1 instead of h4. But now after king e5, we get to see the very same motive as the rook. First of all, it prevents the h-pawn from coming forward, but at the same time, white is just about to play rook f4, forcing sort of the exchange of rooks, or otherwise the f-pawn will be pushed. This is also game over, and therefore white won the game. Black resigned at this point after f5, but we see that Magnus even played a few inaccurate moves. I think this was a very instructive middle game lesson, as well as a nice masterclass how to play rook endgames. I hope you liked it. Let me know in the comments what you think of this game, and make sure to hit that subscribe button. Thanks for doing that, and see you soon again. Bye bye.